There tends to be that narrative that the machines are going to take over jobs and so forth. I do not subscribe to that whatsoever, and the fact that 75% statistic is out there, perhaps in terms of execution and speed, that might be the result. However, you still have asset management committees designing that infrastructure, designing their strategies. It's almost like if you use a generative AI tool, you're still going to editorialize it at the end of the day.
Today we are joined on the show by Jill Malandrino. She is a global markets reporter with the Nasdaq, and I could not be more excited, Jill, to talk to you today. And we met here at Rally. We're at Rally right now, so we're recording this podcast, and we met at the speaker party last night. And so I could not be more excited. And you just had a speech or just a talk that you just gave, right, on one of the stages.
Yep, we just did a panel. And thank you for having me here, by the way.
Absolutely.
I love when things come together organically, which is so reflective of what Rally is about when you think about the top innovators and thought leaders within these multiple spaces. So when these ideas come together organically, that's the best thing for me.
I still agree with that, right? It's authentic.
Yes,
right?
Definitely.
All right, so let's take a trip down memory lane. And I was so fascinated when I was looking at the speaker list, and I saw your name, and it immediately popped out to me. And so I was stoked to meet you. So let's take a little trip down memory lane, and I want to learn more about you when you were growing up. Middle school, high school, like what were you drawn to? What were your passions? If you painted a picture, what you thought your life was going to look like at that time, like tell me about that.
If I never thought in a million years I would be doing media, having created and hosted my own show, which is our best performing show at Nasdaq, certainly a premier offering. Typical Jersey girl, right? It was all about my friends, soccer, the beach. Grew up in Monmouth County, New Jersey, and just like a lot of us, moved to New York City, Jersey City, now in the burbs when you have a family and so forth. But that really, what you see on camera is really who I am in real life. A lot of energy, and the word authentic and authenticity, it's thrown around a lot. It certainly is a buzzword within the social media spaces that we live in right now. But to your point, when we met last night, that's authentic.
Yes.
It's almost like when you want a video, you don't want a video to go viral. It just does.
There
is no planning for it. So
not planning for it.
I started off in institutional equity trading in 1998. I got my Series 7 by the time I was 21. In a million years, I never thought that I would get on a trading desk. Back then, it was different. You kind of, got on a trading desk, and you got the training more on the ground.
Yep.
Now the industry has evolved, and we'll talk about, the parallel of how media and trading has evolved together. But it was one great thing about the 90s. It was very hands-on. You got on a desk, and you just got into it and learned.
That's so interesting you say that. Last night, I was talking with a gentleman at the speaker party in town from a law firm in New York City, and he was talking about with COVID, and then everybody got used to remote working, how a lot of the fifth-year attorneys really are at kind of year 2 level because they haven't gotten to experience what goes on at 10 o'clock at night before a closing, when all hell breaks loose and the deal goes south and falls apart. But we'll come back to that in a minute. So, all right, so very interesting. So you go to school. What did you go to school for?
So it's interesting. I actually went to community college right out of high school, and so worked full time, went to school, and then got into trading from there. So it's definitely not your typical pedigree background.
Yep.
In fact, I finished my undergrad once I was firmly in the media space for UMass Amherst with a degree in journalism in 2019. So raising 3 stepkids and, running the show.
Life happens.
In 2019, right. COVID, that kicked in. And someone I know within the industry, he's also a professor at Rutgers Business School. So shout out to Professor Ralph. And he's like, Jill, I've been waiting for years to write your recommendation letter. So I started grad school at Rutgers. Go Knights, Scarlet Knights, and graduated from there just last May in 2023 with a master's in communications and media studies. And I just started law school in June at Seton Hall. So a couple rivalries going on there. My stepdaughter going to Monmouth, so this whole New Jersey trifecta here. And my track is going to be, once you get out of the first law part that every lawyer goes through, in data privacy and cybersecurity, because everything we're talking about here, the convergence is always going to be around data privacy, governance, cyber mitigation, and response. So
what pulled you into that? So there's you Series 7. By the way, I had an investment banking firm back years ago.
Yeah.
I had to do the 7 and a 63, which is always the easy one. That's the state one. and then a 24, which is like what you had to do as a partner or principal. I did all 3 of those in 90 days.
So
that was tough.
It's interesting, and how I kind of got into trading and interested in investing. When I was younger, I wanted to be a brain surgeon and figured out blood's involved with that. And like, I'm not the one to hold your hair back when you're puking. So, so I'm like, that's not going to be good. My father, when he worked at Exxon, and when they were acquired by another company, going from a pension, they had to roll everything over into a 401k. I was about 10 years old at the time. This guy pulls up from Merrill Lynch in a light blue Porsche with a navy convertible top, dressed well, good-looking guy, wired frame glasses, and I'm like, I want this in my life. Like, I can do this. I have the gift to do these kinds of things and learn.
You felt it.
So it was weird. I mean, I was 10 years old. What did I know? Got into PNC Bank, and they had on the platform, not the tellers, but the platform side, training for insurance. So you got your 63, you got your insurance license, moved up from there, got my 7, ended up going for my 9, 10, 24, 65. But it's different. I'm the kind of person, I have to take the classes, print everything out, highlight, notes in the margin, even with law school now. Like, it's just the way I remember stuff. And I think if there's one message I can deliver is you never can stop learning. I mean, as fast as things evolve. I mean, I started my show as an 8-hour-week contract in 2017 supporting our options business unit, and we grew it. They gave me the editorial latitude, and now we are, a global product focused on emerging technologies, policy, legislation, market structure. And it's just, if you work for a company where you've given the entrepreneurial spirit and can run with it, there's a lot that you can do. So
you remember the days of the trading floor, just crazy chaos. So talk about that a little bit. So, I want to come back to legislation in a little bit too, but describe what that transition felt like and looked like.
So it's interesting within the business, when we call it downstairs, those are your trading floors, like your CBOTs, your NYMEXs, your New York Stock Exchange. Of course, a lot of those have transitioned to other businesses. Nasdaq, where we are, in 1971 when we launched, have always been an electronic exchange. And FYI, that's where trading takes place anyway, electronically. I worked on what's called upstairs on the trading desks. And, what's so interesting with trading, particularly back then, I don't know if it's something I'd want to do now. It's a different kind of environment. It was a very, there's a lot of meritocracy there. You kind of function as a desk, as a unit, and I don't know if I could ever work in a closed door office. Even at Nasdaq, where I sit now, we have it looks like a trading desk. So I sit with our markets intelligence desk, our events teams, and so forth, where our studios are. In fact, our studio where my show takes place, CNBC Fast Money, that's where their show is as well. So it's a very open environment. I can't work in quiet, even when I work from home, but there's always something going.
I love it. All right. So then, as you've got up to speed, what are some of the most interesting companies? Or if you can't say this, that's all good too. Just let me know. But what are some of the most interesting companies? Well, we'll put this to the positive side. You're like, oh wow, that CEO or exec team or whoever it is, or that company really has it right. They're really doing the right things to disrupt themselves for the greater good of their customer or even society. Or what are there a couple of things that pop out in your mind from your show?
It's interesting because of our listings business. I can't cover stocks. So, for example, Apple's earnings are coming up. I'm like, oh, you can't buy that into the print, or buy it into the print. And that's what differentiates our content relative to other mainstream financial media. It's panel style format, just like CNBC Fast Money, 3-4 people around the desk. And for example, when we started covering AI more regularly, once ChatGPT became part of the vernacular, the way I directed it from an editorial perspective was, let's think about the ethical and responsible use, how policy and legislation is going to evolve, what that's going to look like globally, what does intellectual property look like. That's what we're talking about now. We all know NVIDIA has exposure to it, the derivatives of that. What other sectors are going to be part of this? And that's why this is my first year at Rally, and why I like this a lot. It's all cross-sector. And that's how my show is. So for example, we can have a trust in AI panel. I can have an academic, a lawyer, a practitioner, an analyst in the space. So you're getting multiple points of view on one particular topic. In fact, the panel I just did before was AI and trading. And the way I kind of wrapped it up was, it's all about acquiring data, structuring in a way that will allow you to make quantifiable decisions. Oh, and by the way, I just covered this in robotic surgery last week. Because this kind of data is helping surgeons in neurosurgical field, as an example, that was on my show, make those kind of decisions and bring their risk percentages down.
Does anything come top of mind that you think are like blind risk factors that maybe some people are starting to talk about, but hasn't become, in our everyday language of how we talk about risk with AI and unintended consequences? Is there anything that you've kind of heard out there that you're like, hey, we need to be aware?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, like I said, we'll have multiple disciplines on when we talk about AI. And one of the things that I have brought up a lot, because I believe in civil discourse and asking the hard questions.
Sure.
Right? In fact, we spoke about ethics in my panel before. This reminds me of 2018 in a way when everyone attached blockchain to their story, and now we're right. I mean, we had, I think, even on Nasdaq, we had a food company attached blockchain to.
Right.
It's a well-known story. So with AI, just because you have that good story and you have a PR agency helping you develop the communication strategy, the rush to go to market, and I get, different organizations across the enterprise are competing for different priorities. If you're, in a revenue role, a product role, you want to roll those out. I tend to think of the risk management side first, where are we doing enough testing? Is our cyber teams and is our CISO up to speed with all of this? How will it impact whether it's an internal or external rollout? And because technology is evolving so quick, like Moore's Law, every iteration, it increases faster. Are those guardrails in place? And AI and machine learning and so forth, it's nothing new. But now that it's such a part of the commercial vernacular, is the risk management also a priority when it comes to product rollout?
Yeah, I love everybody says, we're blah, 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 AI company. Well, it might be BI, and sometimes BI is really great. It doesn't have to be AI.
Right.
All right, so how about, unintended consequences of legislation and having, let's say, a patchwork, like a quilt of legislation across the country versus, a federal statute or body of law that we can all kind of subscribe to, like in unintended consequences of how that might further the gap of big tech and innovation.
It's interesting. My thesis for my grad work was on content moderation legislation in a Web3 world. And around that was because of the uniqueness of our First Amendment and how we fundamentally approach data and free speech relative to the EU. So I was comparing EU and US.
So interesting.
Right. So it's the same premise as well when it comes to the Digital Services Act in the EU, MiCA, AI. Their legal system works differently. They can, or even GDPR, you're familiar with that.
Sure, yeah.
They're able to implement these frameworks. US legislation, it's an evolution of the law. So when that question is, why can't we just put this into place like the EU did? Our framework is just different. Here's a great example. I don't cover HR typically, but I did something around HR and AI, and I had a commissioner from the EEOC on. And I'd asked him, how are we supposed to adhere to the regulations and framework that's in place? And he's like, Jill, think about what you're saying, whether it's people or a machine that is either making the selection or hiring, you have to have your workforce within this framework. It doesn't matter what the apparatus is, the framework exists for that. And the law will evolve with the technology. And the whole thing is technology moves so much quicker than the law does.
Right.
It's just fundamentally different. Oh, and by the way, to your point, the states have different jurisdictions. Let's look at healthcare law as an example. In my law school work I'm doing now, we were looking at different scopes of practices for nurse practitioners. It's different in every state. Where there's reciprocity, what your scope of practice, meaning what you're allowed to do, the type of education, the licensing, how long how many hours you need. It's even with barbers and cosmetologists and so forth, anything where the health aspect is involved, there is no cohesive legislation because of the state. So when you're operating across multiple jurisdictions, hopefully you have a really good legal team.
Yeah, the one thing I've found that's really encouraging as I've gotten more involved in meeting with governors or senators or legislators, et cetera, is there does seem to be a real genuine desire of those folks collectively to learn, right? Because they all have various backgrounds and grew up various ways, and so they may be an expert in insurance packaging or whatever, but they're not an expert in some type of infrastructure, right? With some piece of technology in in passing legislation that has unintended consequences. And I think just for people that might be listening to the show thinking about, well, what can I do? Like really encourage, typically in most states there are groups, whoever that may be, that are great conduits, right, into legislators. Have you seen anything as you talk to various folks, across the country or even, across the pond, any groups that are going about ways of open dialogue and educating legislators on kind of how the world works, how this stuff works, and avoiding unintended consequences?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because I started covering digital assets in 2018, which is kind of like one of the first mainstream, areas of the media that started to cover it.
Yep.
In fact, the first conference I covered was Consensus, and anyone who was there that was reporting, we were literally like in the lobby of the Midtown Hilton, I believe it is. Flash forward, and I've been covering every year since, literally the entire Austin Convention Center. What I find fascinating about the way it has evolved over the past 6 years, and it doesn't sound like a long time, but that is a long time in the digital asset space.
Oh, it's forever.
The conferences and the content we cover on my show aren't necessarily, how Bitcoin's trading and product that's rolling out or whatever, altcoin or NFTs. We not attack it. We go from the perspective of policy, capital markets, the integration with institutions and these emerging technologies. I think the digital asset community has done a great job of working with legislators and policymakers in terms of bringing them up to speed and being able to put it out there in a digestible way. This is what it means for your constituents, right? This is how we create jobs. These are, different ways to look at taxes as a result of this. And it's a younger, dynamic group. I think because a lot of traditional capital markets folks have transitioned into digital asset space, there is that policy formulation background there as well. And I'll tell you, Mainnet by Masari is a conference that focuses on that. Consensus this year, I would say, this was such an interesting time. It was so capital markets focused. In fact, the booth behind me, just like we have stages A, B, C, D, they had an entire day devoted to digital assets and policy making.
Yep.
To me, that's encouraging. Those are the catalysts beyond a spot ETF rolled out or spot ETH rolled out. That framework, to me, that is the catalyst more so in my mind.
Yep. So now I want to tie it together. I think this is fascinating. I'd be curious if you've heard this or if you think this as well. But going back to your, the Series 7 days and the trading, and then now to AI, and you're talking with companies and entrepreneurs and legislators. So if we go back, I think it's roughly 25, 30 years ago, basically no public trades were made without human intervention. Fast forward to today, 75% of public trades are made without human intervention. And it's believed in 36 months that 75% of venture capital decisions are going to be made without human intervention. So in the VC world, that'd be sourcing, vetting, diligence, even post-investment, decisions. Have you come across this phenomenon yet, and have any thoughts about that?
We spoke about that on our panel as well, because there tends to be that narrative that the machines are going to take over jobs and so forth. I do not subscribe to that whatsoever, in the fact that 75% statistic is out there. Perhaps in terms of execution and speed, that might be the result. However, you still have asset management committees,
Yep.
designing that infrastructure, designing their strategies. It's almost like if you use a generative AI tool, you're still going to editorialize it at the end of the day.
Yep.
So there's just different strategies. I mean, if you are, as an example, let's say I'm portfolio manager A, you're B, my machine is going to buy Apple or do some sort of complex options overlay. Our parameters might be different. Our risk tolerances and timeframes might be different. So
Yep.
the human element is not going to come out of it. Machines, at least at this point, don't have the ability to think in those terms. Here's a great example that Ryan Pinnell from Kaiju, the panel, I
Yep.
interviewed him. If he's like, if I take an AI platform and I have it go to a candy store and I tell it pick out one jelly bean, one flavor of every jelly bean in that store, but can it discern the difference between a peanut or a jelly bean, which has the same shape? Did I tell it there's 64 flavors? There's still the human putting in the parameters and the editorial side of it is not.
Yep.
It's gonna be there.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
What haven't we touched on that you want to touch on today?
I think I love being at Rally because, again, I have designed our show as it evolved over the years with cross-sector and multiple disciplines. So, when I'm sitting on my panel about AI and trading, and we wrap it up with, at the end of the day, all this data that we're learning how to structure better and make quantifiable, better decisions across every single sector that's here.
Yes.
And when you can physically see it come together, and we're also thinking about, the regulatory and the, risk management aspect is so encouraging to me. It's a much more intelligent conversation than we were having about these emerging technologies, even let's call it 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, you think cross sector, and I love to then sprinkle that with disparate stakeholders. And so it's not just investor, it's not just entrepreneur that makes innovation happen. Policymakers, educators, philanthropists, like it's all these different types of people that all have a little finger in the innovation pie.
And I also think watching the startups, even if you started, multiple companies, you still are a founder, and then you have VC here. You see how the process of capital formation and introduction works,
Yes.
and the amount of work they put into it, and what sectors are being focused on, what regions.
Yes.
And hearing, I would say the majority is, angel round, A round. They want to get in at the bottom. And I also feel like things have evolved where there's more advising and governance as well.
Yep.
To see it all in one place is truly an amazing experience.
It's awesome. Well, Jill, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's an honor to spend time with you, and I can't wait to our relationship just furthering down the road.
All right. Thank you so much, Toph.
All right, thank you.